Next thing, so the other thing that I want to talk to you about here is the fiscal policy, right? So everything that is to do with money, every decision that is taken by the RBI vis-a-vis the money is through the monetary policy. Then obviously government of India also can influence the sort of mood in an economy. It can boost production, etc. by its policy measures known as fiscal policy. Okay, so fiscal policy basically deals with taxation and spending. Okay, so let's say the government of India decides to increase government spending, right? So let's say government of India wants, so let's say today government of India is making 10 rupees in tax payments. Okay, so the government of India decides that I will invest another 100 rupees in the economy. So the moment the government of India invests 100 rupees, it leads to better roads, it leads to better infrastructure. That means that more laborers are required to make those roads. Therefore the companies are going to pay those salaries to the laborers, right? And similarly there would be a more of an economic activity that is there in the country, right? So let's say the roads would then reduce the cost of production, and the companies would produce more things. The companies could then, because the cost of production is reduced, could export these goods to other countries and make money from there. So let's say the government spends 100 rupees, right? And it would lead to, so now these laborers have to be paid money, laborers have to be paid money, a lot of officers and managers have to be paid money. Now they will get more salary, and then the government of India will get more, let's say, taxes in terms of income tax. So for every 100 rupees that the government of India spends, it might be able to realize more taxes. Okay, so that's one of the policies that the government of India works for. So the government thinks that if I spend 100 rupees today and I am receiving 10 rupees in income tax every year, maybe if I spend 100 rupees today, 25 years down the line, I'll be able to make 15 rupees, 20 rupees from income tax, because the general GDP and the growth of the economy would have started, and therefore people would have started earning more money. So this is one way that the government regulates. The other thing is it can obviously increase or decrease tax rates. So let's say if the income tax rate is 30% and government of India decides that, okay, I want people to buy more things. Now the easiest way for government of India to do this is to reduce income tax from 30% to 20%. So if I was earning 100 rupees and I was paying 30 rupees in taxes, I was only left with 80 rupees to spend, right? Now, if on the other side the government of India says, okay, now you need to pay only 20 rupees, so I am now left with an additional 10 rupees to spend. Now when I spend that money in the economy, it will obviously have a multiplier effect, and that will boost the economy. Okay, so this is how the fiscal policy works. Now there are certain terms that you might see in newspapers. So the first term is bond yield. I really don't think that issue. I don't think that it'll ever be asked to you in an exam. So effectively, so we discussed in yesterday's lecture what bonds are. So effectively, the sort of interest that you get on a bond when these bonds are traded on the open market, because bonds by nature are instruments that have fixed coupon rates, right? So let's say government of India says that my face value of my bond that I'm putting out in the market is 100 rupees, and the coupon payment is 5 rupees, which means every year I will pay 5 rupees to the holder of these bonds. Okay, now once the government of India issues these bonds at 100 rupees, 5 rupees is the coupon payment, then these bonds become tradable in the open market, right? So if let's say people think that they want to invest more in terms of bonds, then they will start buying these bonds. So the cost of the bonds in the stock market, which was 100, would increase, because if more, it's the simple principle of economics, right? If there is more demand and if there is less supply, then the price would increase. Now when the price of the bond increases, the yield of the bond reduces, right? Because obviously if let's say someone's buying that bond at 101 rupees because he believes that the markets are not going to be stable and government of India bonds are the only bonds that will be able to give me some return, right? So he will buy that bond for 100 rupees, 101 rupees. However, the coupon rate is a fixed 5 rupees, right? So he'll only be making a profit of 4 rupees over there. So that effective rate of interest is basically the bond yield. Okay. Then you have concepts like fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit basically, so obviously if the government, so the reason why government is spending money is because it is making money through its taxation policies, right? So whenever, let's say if the tax collected by the government is more than the money that the government is spending, then obviously the government is in is running a surplus, right? So that would be a fiscal surplus. However, if the taxes that the government is collecting is less than the money that the government is spending, then that condition is known as the fiscal deficit. So there is an act called the FRBM Act, which effectively mandates that the government should maintain a fiscal deficit of about 3%. Now, fiscal deficit of 3% is generally understood to be good, because the thing is that if, let's say, the government is spending more than it is getting from taxation, it will obviously have to borrow this money from, let's say, the people in the economy itself, internal borrowing, or it might borrow from other multilateral international agencies. However, the fact that the government is spending that extra money would have a multiplier effect, and at a later date the tax revenues of the government would increase. So a healthy fiscal deficit that government should maintain is around 3%. So you would have heard of this term that the government wants to reduce its fiscal deficit to 3% from 3.5%. So that is effectively what the government is trying to do. Now, in terms of fiscal deficit, there could be two reasons as to why there is a deficit, in the sense that why the revenues are lesser than the government spending. Now, one is a cyclical fiscal deficit, right? Now, anything cyclical means that it moves in cycles. So let's say the economy is booming, then obviously we will not be in a fiscal deficit, because the revenue that the government is earning would be more than the money it is spending. However, let's say in specific times, like the times of coronavirus, obviously the GDP of the country is down. Obviously, there is not enough production in the market. So the taxes that the government is going to realize will also be less. But there are certain expenditures that the government has to do. Government has to do defense expenditure, government has to spend money on health, the government has to spend money on education, right? So in certain scenarios like this, in certain cyclical scenarios like this, obviously the fiscal deficit would increase because there is low productivity in the economy, right? Now, this is called as a cyclical fiscal deficit. There is another term which is known as, there's another term which is known as structural fiscal deficit, right? So as I told you, fiscal deficit could be because of cyclical events like this. However, structural fiscal deficit means that when all conditions are equal, when there is nothing disruptive in the economy, there are still certain deficits that the government is incurring because of maybe the bad policies that it has, right? So if the deficit which is there, which is not related to the economy, which is not a part of the economic cycle, that deficit is known as the fiscal deficit. Maybe the taxation policy of the government is bad, maybe the government is spending way too much money, and if and probably that money is being dwindled away in corruption. So that is another issue. If it's not reaching its intended source, then it can't produce a multiplier effect. So these things would contribute to the structural fiscal deficit, which is independent of the economy. Okay. Now, there are two other terms that I see here, which are direct taxation and indirect taxation. So it's fairly easy. Direct tax is basically that the tax that is directly paid by me. So income tax would fall into this category. Let's say I am earning 100 rupees and the government says, okay, 30% tax. So I am effectively earning only 70 rupees, and 30 rupees is something that I have to give to the government. So the taxation is directly on me, right? Now, another component of taxation is the indirect taxes, like your GST, right? So I am effectively not paying. The vendor who's selling the good to me, I pay that extra money to him, and then that vendor pays the GST, right? So in an economy, there has to be a balance between direct taxation and indirect taxation. Now, direct taxation, if there is more of direct taxation, then it is said to be a progressive tax-based economy, right? Because direct taxation is based on how much money you earn. Okay. So let's say I'm someone who's earning 1 crore rupees. I will pay 35% income tax. Okay. Now, however, if I'm someone who's earning, let's say 10 lakh rupees, then I'm obligated to only pay 20% income tax, because the government believes, and rightly so, that I need 80. So to me, 80% of 10 lakhs is more important than 70% of someone who's making 1 crore rupees, right? Because that person is rich and he's most effectively not going to use that money for consumption expenditure. Most likely that money go into savings. Now, similarly, the government also says that if you are earning less than 5 lakh rupees, tum apna hi dekh lo, tum desh ko tax mat do, in terms of direct taxes, right? So therefore, direct taxes are said to be, if there's an economy which has more direct taxation, that economy is said to be a more progressive economy, because the burden on indirect taxes is proportional. So if I earn less than 5 lakh rupees, I pay 0% tax. If I earn between, let's say, 5 to 10 lakh rupees, I don't know what the income tax slab there, I'm giving a hypothetical example, then I pay 20% income tax. Now, if I earn like 10 crore rupees, then I pay 35% income tax, because obviously that money is not as important to me as it is to someone who's making 5 lakhs. Now the other side to this is indirect taxes, right? So let's say there is a Parle-G biscuit which cost 10 rupees. Out of that, 1 rupee is a GST on the Parle-G biscuit. Now someone who is making 1 crore rupee, when he wants to 1 crore rupees, when he wants to eat that Parle-G biscuit, has to spend that extra, has to give that 1 rupee tax. And someone who's earning 3 lakh rupees a year, when that person also wants to eat a Parle-G biscuit, he also has to pay that 1% tax. So therefore indirect tax, when there is more of let's say indirect tax in an economy, that is not said to be a progressive economy, because obviously the tax burden for someone, the tax burden of 1 rupee on a Parle-G packet for someone who's earning 2 lakh rupees a year is way more than the tax burden of 1 rupee on someone who's earning, let's say, 1 crore rupees a year, right? So I hope you understand the difference between direct taxation and indirect taxation, and why direct taxation is said to be the more progressive form of taxation. Okay.